If there's a question that really any bioenergetic or Reichian therapists are asked all the time, then that question is, why don't more people know about this? Why have I just come across this? Because there is an assumption in the mind. There's an assumption that if something's really good and transformational, then it will already be out there and we would all know about it. And this is not a good assumption to make, I can assure you. It applies in several other fields I've been involved in my life. But when we look at Reichian work, for example, we can see by tracing the history of it a little bit and the mentality that was around in the culture at the time, why it's kind of reached a point where it almost died out. Now, Wilhelm Reich was a student of Sigmund Freud back in the 1920s over in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, the kind of home place of psychoanalysis. And back in the 1920s, he was working with clients when he started to introduce, more body-based techniques. Instead of just getting them to free associate or talk about their dreams or this kind of thing, he was kind of sort of prodding into the muscle system. He was getting clients to breathe in a certain way. He was getting them to make sound. He began to diagnose them according to his own formulation, which became Reichian character structure, at the time 4 different archetypes that he worked with. So Reich developed a whole heap of techniques, some of which you do need a therapist present to apply, but others you do not, that you can do on your own. So why should it be that so little is known about these techniques, especially given that they can be absolutely transformational? And the answer to that is not some kind of grand conspiracy going on somewhere, but rather that, when Reich began his work and then he in 1920s, 1930s, he started to acquire students who were interested, they'd received these techniques and naturally they'd had a transformation and they thought, wow, I want to go and teach these. Reich insisted that the person was a medical doctor. He had to have a basic standard at that time. He was also working a lot with sexuality, which was a very controversial subject then and continues to be, of course. And so he had to have a basic standard, and that standard was, you needed to be a medical doctor. And that would take some years to get that qualification. And a lot of the time he was only working on people with that qualification as well. So that was one kind of block and bar that made it a little bit tricky. And then secondarily, even though he wrote a lot of books, he did not write one book about, in fact, hardly a thing about what his actual techniques were. And I believe the main reason for that is, not just to keep it all to himself, because he really wasn't that kind of a guy, but rather that out of concern that it was not, this kind of information was not ready for wider dissemination to the public. So he would write a lot of books on theory, in his most famous book, Character Analysis, and then he moved into his orgone theory and stuff like that. But he never wrote anything about his actual techniques. So to this day, actually, the only book which goes into any depth about Reichian techniques that I'm aware of is the Reich Home Book written by Jack Willis. And, that is available as a free PDF download. It's very long and it's got tons of excellent information, but it is quite tricky to read in places, but it nevertheless does have a huge amount of exercises. I'm not entirely sure of the whole history of the Reich Home Book by Jack Willis, but my understanding is that he was encouraged to write it by Francis Rigardi, his teacher, and who I don't think had worked with Reich, but I'm not entirely sure about that, but who had developed Reich's work and taken it up to another level, and he asked Jack Willis to write it all down and put it all out for posterity. That's my understanding, but there was some contretemps or discussion with Chris Hyatt as well, another larger-than-life therapist character from that era, also an author. So that's how we have some trace of Reichian work left now. And when we look at bioenergetics, the situation is a little bit better, but not so much better. Bioenergetics in the West was created by a chap called Alexander Lowen. He was a student of Wilhelm Reich. He had to become a doctor, become an MD. I believe he went to Europe, maybe Switzerland, to do that. And so then he could train with Reich. And then subsequently he split with Reich and eventually he ended up forming his own organization, and he called his own technique Bioenergetics. And he also was a prolific author, writing about, 10, 15 books. And one of those books contains a lot of exercises. That is this one, The Way to Vibrant Health. This is an old edition, but you can pick up a newer edition on Amazon fairly easily. And it's got a lot of exercises in it, but to my mind, they're not quite as well described as I would love to see them. And so I ended up writing my own books on the subject of bioenergetics, 2 of them because I was concerned. I wanted to bring the techniques out in more detailed and functional, practical ways that they can be applied, and also to expand the number of techniques, because also Lowen's book does not have a wide variety of techniques, and I'd learned a lot more, and I'd also been working on myself extensively and discovered other techniques. And so I wanted to make this video just to clear up this question a little bit and give what knowledge I have. I'm actually hoping to learn a little bit more about the connection between Francis Rigardi and Wilhelm Reich at some point. And if I do that, I'll put that information out. But, I think this is a time when so many people are moving out of the body, and we're so kind of locked into our mental world, and we've all got computers and phones and everything like that, and it's all thinking. There's going to come a renaissance of Reich's work and Lowen's work, and people wanting to come back into the body, to stop dissociating and to be present. Now, if you know of any other books, then please do let me know, which has got a good range of exercises in them. But apart from my own work, currently we only have about those two books about these two fields, which really cover a lot of exercises. Okay, thank you for tuning in. Do check out my work at bioenergetics.org.uk. I've got some great online courses if you want to get into this stuff, and I will speak to you later.